Jessica Adams clutched the telegram in her trembling hands as she stood on the dusty porch of the general store in Fort Laramie, Wyoming Territory, 1876. The paper crinkled as her fingers tightened around it, the words swimming before her tear-filled eyes. Marriage plans terminated. James reconsiders. Do not come west. The ink seemed to burn through her skin, scorching her heart as effectively as the merciless August sun beating down on her travel-weary shoulders. 3 weeks she had traveled. 3 grueling weeks by train, stagecoach, and finally the back of her rented mare, all to meet the man who had proposed by letter 8 months ago after a brief courtship during his visit east. The man who now, apparently, had changed his mind. Madam. The storekeeper's voice broke through her thoughts. You all right there? Jessica straightened her back, tucking the telegram into her pocket with as much dignity as she could muster. I'm fine, thank you. Could you direct me to the nearest lodging? It seems I'll need accommodations while I sort out my affairs. The round-faced man pointed down the street. Widow Henley's boarding house is 2 blocks that way, clean beds, fair prices. He hesitated, eyes darting to her travel-worn appearance and the small valise at her feet. If you don't mind me asking, are you Jessica Adams? Only we've been expecting James Ellsworth's bride-to-be, and yes, she interrupted, her voice stronger than she felt. I am she, though it appears there will be no wedding after all. The storekeeper's face fell. That don't sound like James at all. Man's been fixing up his ranch for months, talking about nothing but his Eastern bride coming. Even built on a proper lady's sitting room. Jessica's heart clenched. Perhaps you know him better than I. She grabbed her valise and nodded a polite goodbye, not trusting herself to speak further without her voice betraying her. As she stepped onto the street, her sensible traveling boots kicked up small clouds of dust. Fort Laramie had grown since its early days as a military outpost, but it was still rough around the edges, a far cry from her comfortable Boston existence. Buildings of weathered wood lined the main thoroughfare, their facades bleached by years of sun. Men in dusty clothes moved purposefully about their business, many tipping their hats as she passed. She nodded in return, fighting to maintain her composure. Jessica had given up everything to come west: her teaching position, her small apartment, even most of her possessions that wouldn't fit in her trunks. She had sold or given away nearly everything, keeping only what she could reasonably transport. Her mother had passed 2 years prior, her father long before that. There was nothing left for her in Boston, and now, it seemed, nothing awaiting her here either. The boarding house appeared ahead, a 2-story structure with a fresh coat of white paint that stood out among the weathered buildings surrounding it. A small sign hung from the porch. Henley's Boarding and Lodging. Jessica took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and approached the door. She would secure a room, locate her trunks when they arrived, and then she would decide what to do. As she reached for the door handle, the sounds of rapid hoofbeats pulled her attention back to the street. A man on horseback was approaching at speed, dust billowing behind him. The powerful chestnut gelding came to a sliding stop not 10 feet from where she stood. "Whoa there, Thunder," the rider commanded, his deep voice carrying easily on the still air. Jessica stared as the man dismounted in one fluid motion. Tall and broad-shouldered, he wore a worn leather vest over a once white shirt, faded denim pants tucked into scuffed boots, and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low over his eyes. His movements spoke of strength and an easy familiarity with his body that came from years of physical labor. When he pushed his hat back to wipe his brow, she caught her breath. Intense blue eyes set in a sun-weathered face met hers, and a flicker of recognition passed through them. "Miss Adams?" he asked, taking a step forward. She nodded, clutching her valise tighter. "Yes, and you are?" "Jacob Eastwood," he replied, removing his hat completely now. His dark hair was matted with sweat from his ride, a few strands falling across his forehead. "I'm James Ellsworth's neighbor to the north, been helping him get the place ready for you." Jessica's throat tightened. "Then perhaps you can explain why I received this." She pulled the telegram from her pocket, holding it out with a hand she willed not to shake. Jacob frowned, taking the paper and scanning its contents. His brow furrowed deeper with each word. When he looked up, confusion was written plainly across his features. This makes no sense. James has been working from sunup to sundown getting everything perfect for your arrival. He handed the telegram back. 2 days ago, he rode into Fort Collins to fetch some special curtain material you'd mentioned in your letters. He should have been back yesterday. A cold knot formed in Jessica's stomach. Then where is he? Jacob shook his head. That's what I came to find out. When he didn't show at our weekly poker game last night, I figured he was just busy with final preparations. But when his ranch hand rode over this morning saying he hadn't returned, he paused, measuring his words. I thought maybe he'd come to town to meet you instead. No, Jessica said quietly. I've just arrived and haven't seen him. Jacob studied her face for a long moment, then glanced at the telegram again. Miss Adams, I've known James Ellsworth for 7 years. He's as steady as they come, and he's been counting the days until your arrival. Something isn't right here. Jessica's mind raced. The storekeeper had said the same thing that James had been preparing for her arrival with enthusiasm. It didn't match the cold dismissal in the telegram. Miss, if you'll permit me to speak plainly, Jacob continued, replacing his hat, I don't believe James changed his mind, not one bit. Then how do you explain this? She gestured to the telegram, Jacob's jaw set in a determined line. I can't, but I aim to find out. He looked toward the western horizon, then back to her. Miss Adams, I know this is forward of me, but would you consider coming out to James's ranch with me? His place is about 2 hours' ride from town. If there's been some misunderstanding, it would be best cleared up quickly. Jessica hesitated. Everything she knew about propriety screamed against going to a man's ranch, unchaperoned, with a virtual stranger. But she had traveled thousands of miles to start a new life with James. She deserved answers at the very least. Mr. Eastwood, she said finally, I appreciate your concern. But I've just completed a very long journey. I need to secure lodging and rest before making any further decisions. He nodded, respect evident in his expression. Of course. The widow Henley runs a good establishment. He gestured to the boarding house. I'll be staying at the hotel tonight, asking around about James. Perhaps tomorrow, after you've rested, we could speak again. There's a cafe next to the general store that serves a decent breakfast. That would be acceptable, Jessica agreed, relieved at his understanding. 8 o'clock. He suggested. 8 o'clock, she confirmed. Jacob tipped his hat. Until tomorrow then, Miss Adams. He turned to his horse, then paused. And miss, for what it's worth, I haven't changed my mind about James's character in all the years I've known him. He's a good man. With that, he mounted his horse and rode toward the hotel, leaving Jessica standing on the boarding house steps, the telegram still clutched in her hand, and a new emotion stirring beneath her pain and confusion, a tiny, fragile hope that perhaps James hadn't betrayed her after all. Morning came too early after a restless night. Jessica had tossed and turned on the unfamiliar mattress, her mind churning with questions. She had expected to spend the night in James's arms as his wife. Instead, she found herself alone in a sparse room at Widow Henley's, with only uncertainty for company. She dressed carefully in a practical day dress of cornflower blue. Her trunks had not yet arrived, so she made do with what she had packed in her valise. After arranging her hair in a simple but neat style, she made her way downstairs. Widow Henley, a stern-faced woman with kind eyes, intercepted her at the foot of the stairs. Coffee in the dining room, Miss Adams. No extra charge. Thank you, Jessica said with a grateful smile. I'm meeting someone for breakfast at the cafe, but I would appreciate a cup before I go. Meeting Jacob Eastwood, are you? The widow's eyes twinkled knowingly. Jessica's surprise must have shown on her face because the widow chuckled. Small town, miss. Word travels. Besides, I saw him ride up yesterday. She lowered her voice. Fine man, Mr. Eastwood, runs one of the most prosperous cattle operations in the county. Never understood why he hasn't settled down. Jessica felt her cheeks warm. I'm meeting him to discuss James Ellsworth's whereabouts. Nothing more, the widow nodded, but her knowing smile remained. Of course, dear, coffee's hot. After a quick cup of strong black coffee that helped clear the fog from her mind, Jessica made her way to the café. Fort Laramie was already bustling with morning activity. Merchants opened their shops. Ranch hands who had spent the night in town prepared to ride out, and women swept the wooden sidewalks in front of businesses. The café was a small, tidy establishment with checkered curtains and the enticing smell of fresh bread and bacon. Jacob Eastwood was already there, seated at a table by the window, his hat placed neatly beside him. He stood when she entered, his height even more imposing in the confined space. "Miss Adams," he greeted her, pulling out a chair, "I trust you slept well." "As well as could be expected," she replied, taking the offered seat. "Have you learned anything?" Jacob waited until she was settled before sitting back down. "Some. James was definitely in town 3 days ago. Bought supplies at the general store, had his horse reshod at the blacksmith's, then headed toward Fort Collins as planned. And no one has seen him since." "No one here," Jacob confirmed. "I sent a wire to the sheriff in Fort Collins last night, haven't received a reply yet." A waitress approached their table and they paused their conversation to order breakfast. Once she had gone, Jessica leaned forward. "Mr. Eastwood, Jacob, please," he interrupted. "Out here formalities don't last long," she nodded. "Jacob then, and you may call me Jessica." She took a deep breath. "I need to understand what might have happened. James's letters gave me the impression he was eager for our marriage. Nothing suggested any hesitation or doubt." Jacob's expression grew serious. "That matches what I know of his state of mind. He spoke of you often, showed me your letters with pride." He hesitated. "May I ask who sent that telegram?" "It was unsigned," Jessica admitted. "I assumed it came from James." "But it didn't actually say it was from him," she frowned, thinking back. "No, it didn't. It just stated that James had reconsidered and that I shouldn't come west." Jacob's eyes narrowed. "Someone didn't want you to come here, but I don't think it was James." The waitress returned with plates of eggs, bacon, and biscuits, momentarily halting their conversation. Jessica realized she was ravenous, having eaten little the day before. "What do you propose we do?" she asked after taking a few bites. "I still think we should ride out to James's ranch," Jacob replied. "His ranch hand, Miguel, is there. He might have more information. And you should see the place James has built, the preparations he's made for you. It might help you understand." Jessica considered his words. The idea of riding to an unknown ranch with a man she had just met still gave her pause, but her worry for James was growing. "If something had happened to him, I'll need to arrange for a horse," she said finally. Jacob smiled, the expression transforming his serious face. "Already done. There's a gentle mare at the livery stable waiting for you. I took the liberty this morning, hoping you'd agree." "That was presumptuous," she remarked, but without real censure. "Efficient," he countered, his smile widening slightly. "We should leave soon if we want to reach the ranch by midday." They finished their breakfast, and Jacob insisted on paying despite Jessica's protests. As they left the café, the telegraph operator came hurrying down the street toward them. "Mr. Eastwood," he called. "Got a reply from Fort Collins." Jacob took the telegram, unfolding it quickly. His expression darkened as he read. "What is it?" Jessica asked, anxiety rising. "James arrived in Fort Collins 2 days ago," he said grimly. "Purchased the curtain material you wanted, stayed one night at the hotel, and set out for home yesterday morning." He looked up, meeting her eyes. He should have been back by now. Jessica felt cold despite the warm morning sun. "Something's happened to him," Jacob nodded. "Possibly. The trail between here and Fort Collins isn't always safe. There have been reports of bandits recently." He folded the telegram and tucked it into his vest pocket. "We should head to the ranch first, see if he's turned up. If not, I'll gather some men to search the trail." They walked quickly to the livery stable, where 2 horses were saddled and waiting, Jacob's powerful chestnut and a smaller, dappled mare that eyed Jessica with gentle curiosity. "This is Penny," Jacob said, patting the mare's neck. "She's even tempered and sure-footed. James mentioned in his letters that you ride." "Yes," Jessica confirmed. "My father insisted I learn as a girl." What she didn't add was that it had been several years since she had ridden regularly, city life offering few opportunities. Jacob helped her mount, his hands strong and steady as he boosted her into the saddle. Once she was settled, he checked Penny's cinch and adjusted the stirrups to better fit Jessica's height. "Ready?" he asked, looking up at her. Jessica straightened her back and nodded, determined not to show her nervousness. "Yes." They rode out of town heading northwest, following a well-worn trail that wound through rolling grasslands dotted with sagebrush. The late summer sun climbed higher, its heat tempered by a gentle breeze that carried the scent of dry grass and distant pine. In different circumstances, Jessica might have appreciated the beauty of the landscape so different from the crowded streets and formal gardens of Boston. Jacob rode slightly ahead, occasionally pointing out landmarks or naming distant mountain ranges. His ease in the saddle spoke of a lifetime spent on horseback. His broad shoulders relaxed as he guided his mount with minimal effort. "How long have you been in Wyoming territory?" Jessica asked after they had been riding for about an hour. Jacob glanced back at her. "Came out here in '68, right after the war. Worked as a ranch hand for 3 years, saved every penny, then bought my own spread when a widow was looking to sell." "You fought in the war?" she asked, curious about this taciturn man who was helping her without hesitation. "Union cavalry," he confirmed. "19th Illinois, saw more than my share of fighting." His tone made it clear he didn't wish to elaborate, and Jessica didn't press. "And you met James?" "In '69. He had the place next to where I was working. Young fellow with big dreams and a willingness to work hard. We struck up a friendship." He smiled slightly at some memory. "When I bought my own ranch, it happened to border his to the north. We've been neighbors and friends ever since." They rode in companionable silence for a while longer. Jessica was beginning to feel the effects of being in the saddle after so long, but she refused to complain. Her mind kept returning to James and the mysterious telegram. Who would want to prevent her from coming to Fort Laramie? And more importantly, what had happened to her fiancé? "There it is," Jacob said eventually, pointing to a cluster of buildings nestled in a gentle valley ahead. Ellsworth Ranch. As they drew closer, Jessica could make out a sturdy log house with a wide front porch, several outbuildings, a corral with a few horses, and beyond, rolling pastures where cattle grazed. It was modest compared to some of the grand estates back east, but there was a solidity to it, a sense of something built to last. A man emerged from the barn as they approached, shading his eyes against the sun. He called something in Spanish, then hurried toward them. "Miguel," Jacob greeted as they reined in. "Any sign of James?" The ranch hand shook his head, his weathered face creased with worry. "No, Senor Eastwood, nothing." His gaze shifted to Jessica and recognition dawned. "Senorita Adams, James's bride." "Yes," Jessica confirmed, allowing Jacob to help her dismount. Her legs felt wobbly after the long ride. "He will be so happy you are here," Miguel exclaimed, then his face fell. "When he returns." Jacob handed the reins of both horses to Miguel. "Take care of them, would you?" "I'm going to show Miss Adams the house, then we need to organize a search party." Miguel nodded and led the horses away, casting concerned glances over his shoulder. "Come," Jacob said to Jessica, guiding her toward the house. "You should see what James has prepared for you." The front door opened onto a spacious main room with a stone fireplace at one end. The furnishings were simple but well-crafted: a sturdy table with chairs, a comfortable-looking sofa, and several bookshelves filled with volumes that made Jessica's heart lift. James had remembered her love of reading. "He added this part recently," Jacob said, leading her to a doorway on the right. It opened into a bright, airy room with large windows that caught the afternoon sun. A writing desk stood in one corner, a comfortable chair beside the window, and built-in shelves lined one wall. "Your sitting room," as he called it. Said a lady should have her own space. Jessica's throat tightened as she ran her fingers along the smooth wood of the desk. James had made this for her, thinking of her comfort and happiness in their new life together. And through here, Jacob continued, moving to another door, the bedroom. Jessica hesitated, propriety warring with curiosity. Jacob smiled reassuringly. It's proper for you to see it, given the circumstances. James would want you to. The bedroom was dominated by a large bed with a handmade quilt in shades of blue and green. A wardrobe stood against one wall, a chest of drawers against another. On the dresser sat a small silver-framed photograph, the one Jessica had sent James of herself shortly after their engagement. He kept it where he could see it every morning and night, Jacob said softly. Tears pricked at Jessica's eyes. This was not the action of a man who had changed his mind about marrying her. Something was terribly wrong. We need to find him, she said, turning to Jacob with resolve. As soon as possible. He nodded, his expression grave. I'll ride to the neighboring ranches, gather men for a search party. We'll start at first light tomorrow, checking the trail to Fort Collins. I'm coming with you, Jessica stated firmly. Jacob looked as though he might object, then thought better of it. All right. But for now, you should rest here. Miguel's wife, Elena, comes up from their cabin to cook. She'll be here soon to prepare dinner. I can't just sit here doing nothing, Jessica protested. You've had a long journey followed by a hard ride today, Jacob pointed out. Rest now, tomorrow will be demanding enough. Reluctantly, Jessica agreed. Jacob showed her where everything was in the house, then prepared to leave. I'll be back before nightfall, he promised. Lock the door behind me. Miguel and Elena's cabin is just down the hill if you need anything before I return. After he rode off, Jessica explored the house more thoroughly. Everywhere she looked, she saw evidence of James's thoughtfulness, shelves at a height she could reach comfortably. Hooks placed where a woman of her stature would find them convenient. A kitchen stocked with the best equipment he could afford. In one drawer of the writing desk, she found a stack of his letters to her that had been returned undelivered. She frowned, picking them up. She had never received these. Opening one dated 2 months ago, she read, My dearest Jessica, I have not heard from you in several weeks, and I confess it worries me. I pray this letter finds you well. The house progresses nicely. I've added the sitting room you mentioned wanting, with plenty of light for your reading and correspondence. Jacob thinks I'm becoming obsessed with details, but I want everything to be perfect for your arrival. I count the days until August when you'll finally be here and we can begin our life together. The letter continued with news of the ranch and questions about her preparations to travel west. Jessica opened another, dated a month later. My beloved Jessica, still no word from you and my concern grows. I've written weekly, yet received no reply. Have my letters gone astray? Has something happened to delay your journey? I cannot believe you would have changed your mind without telling me. Please, if you receive this, send word immediately. A cold realization washed over Jessica. Someone had been intercepting their correspondence, preventing James's letters from reaching her and likely ensuring hers never reached him. The same someone who had sent the false telegram. But who? And why? Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. A woman's voice called in accented English, Miss Adams? I am Elena, Miguel's wife. Jessica let in a small, dark-haired woman with a kind face who carried a basket of provisions. Senor Eastwood said you are here, Elena said, bustling toward the kitchen. I will make you dinner. Thank you, Jessica replied, following her. Have you worked for James long? 5 years, Elena answered, efficiently unpacking her basket. Miguel longer, we live in cabin downhill. Very good man, Senor James, very excited for wedding. She looked at Jessica sympathetically. He will be found, you will see. Jessica helped Elena prepare a simple but hearty meal, grateful for the distraction. As they worked, she asked casual questions about the ranch, the neighbors, and James's habits, hoping for some clue about what might have happened. Any enemies? She asked finally. Anyone who might wish James harm? Elena paused in her chopping of vegetables. There is one, she said hesitantly. Victor Langdon has big ranch east of here, wanted to buy James's land many times. James always say no. Was he persistent about it? Yes, last time 2 months ago, very angry when James refuse again. Alina crossed herself. Bad man Langdon, they say he not always honest in business. Jessica filed this information away just as the sound of approaching horses reached them. She hurried to the window to see Jacob returning with 3 other men. Alina, would you finish here? She asked, already moving toward the door. I need to speak with Mr. Eastwood. Outside, Jacob was dismounting along with his companions, a tall, bearded man in his 50s, a younger man who resembled him enough to be his son, and a weathered-looking individual with a sheriff's badge pinned to his vest. Jessica, Jacob called as she approached. These are our neighbors, Thomas and William Harper, father and son, and Sheriff Daniel Grant from Fort Laramie. Jessica nodded a greeting. Have you found anything? Not yet, Jacob replied, but we've organized a search party for tomorrow. 20 men will meet here at dawn. Sheriff Grant stepped forward, hat in hand. Miss Adams, I understand you received a telegram claiming Mr. Ellsworth had changed his mind about your marriage. Yes, she confirmed, explaining the circumstances. Mighty convenient timing, the sheriff mused. Mr. Ellsworth disappears, and you get a telegram telling you not to come, almost like someone knew something had happened to him. Or someone made something happen to him, Jacob added grimly. I just discovered something else, Jessica told them, explaining about the undelivered letters she had found. Someone has been intercepting our correspondence for months. The men exchanged concerned looks. That takes planning, Sheriff Grant said, and local knowledge. Someone who knew about you too and had access to the mail. Alina mentioned a man named Victor Langdon, Jessica ventured. She said he wanted to buy James's land. Thomas Harper snorted. Langdon's been trying to gobble up every acre he can get his hands on for years. Offered to buy my south pasture last spring for half what it's worth. He's got money and connections, the sheriff added, but accusing him of something this serious would require evidence. Which is why we need to find James first, Jacob stated firmly. The search party will cover the trail to Fort Collins. If he was attacked or had an accident, we'll find sign of it. They discussed the logistics of the search as the sun began to set, painting the valley in golden light. Alina called them in for dinner, and the men ate quickly before departing, promising to return at first light. After they left, Jacob remained, insisting on staying in the barn overnight to keep watch. Just as a precaution, he assured Jessica, though his hand rested meaningfully on the rifle he carried. Left alone in the house, Jessica prepared for bed in the small guest room, refusing to use the master bedroom that should have been hers and James's on their wedding night. As she lay in the unfamiliar darkness, listening to the night sounds of the Wyoming countryside, her mind swirled with worry for James and questions about who might have wanted to prevent their marriage. She must have fallen asleep eventually, because the next thing she knew, urgent knocking jolted her awake. Gray pre-dawn light filtered through the window as she hurriedly donned a robe and rushed to the door. Jacob stood there, fully dressed, his expression grim. Riders coming, armed, James. She asked hopefully. He shook his head. 6 men, don't recognize them all, but Langdon's in the lead. Her heart raced. What do they want? Nothing good showing up armed at this hour. He handed her a small revolver. You know how to use this. Jessica took the weapon, its weight unfamiliar in her hand. My father taught me, but it's been years. Simple enough. Point and pull the trigger if you have to. His blue eyes held hers intently. Stay inside, away from the windows. I'm going out to meet them. Before she could protest, he was gone, striding toward the approaching riders with a confidence she couldn't help but admire. She moved to the window, keeping to the side as she peered out. The men reined in their horses in the yard. Their leader, presumably Langdon, was a heavy-set man with a florid face partially hidden by a neatly trimmed beard. He wore expensive clothes and sat his horse with the stiff posture of someone who rode for status rather than necessity. Eastwood, Langdon called, his voice carrying clearly through the morning air. What are you doing at Ellsworth's place? Looking after it while James is missing, Jacob replied evenly. What brings you here, Langdon? Heard Ellsworth hadn't returned from Fort Collins. Thought I'd check on his property. Langdon's tone was casual, but something in it raised Jessica's hackles. Speaking of property, I've got the papers right here for his land, all legal and proper. Jacob crossed his arms. What papers? Sale agreement. Ellsworth signed over his ranch to me before he left for Fort Collins. Got a fair price, too. Langdon reached into his coat and withdrew a folded document. See for yourself. Jacob took the paper, examining it with obvious skepticism. This is dated 3 days ago, the day James went missing. That's right, Langdon confirmed. We concluded our business, he took my money and headed to Fort Collins. Probably decided to keep going. Some men aren't cut out for ranching. Jessica's hands tightened on the revolver. She knew it was a lie. James would never have sold the ranch he had built for their future, especially not to a man Alina had described as dishonest. Strange, Jacob said, handing the document back. James never mentioned selling. In fact, he was finishing preparations for his bride's arrival. Langdon's expression darkened. The sale is legal. I've got witnesses. He nodded toward 2 of the men with him. We're here to take possession. That won't be happening, Jacob stated firmly. Not while James is missing under suspicious circumstances. Are you accusing me of something, Eastwood? Langdon's hand drifted toward his holstered pistol. Just stating facts. James was last seen alive with money from selling curtain material, not an entire ranch. Now he's missing, and you show up claiming he sold you everything he's worked for. The tension in the yard was palpable. Jessica's heart pounded as she watched the standoff, the small revolver clutched in her sweating palm. I don't want trouble, Langdon said finally, but I will be taking possession of what's legally mine. He nodded to his men. Check the house and outbuildings. Jacob's rifle came up smoothly. No one's going into that house. The other men reached for their weapons, and Jessica knew she couldn't let Jacob face them alone. Taking a deep breath, she opened the door and stepped onto the porch. Gentlemen, she called, keeping the revolver hidden in the folds of her robe, I believe there's been a misunderstanding. All eyes turned to her. Langdon's face registered surprise, quickly masked. And who might you be? He demanded. Jessica Adams, James Ellsworth's fiancée. She moved to stand beside Jacob, her voice steady despite her racing pulse. The woman for whom he built this ranch and whom he was planning to marry yesterday. Langdon's eyes narrowed. Ellsworth said his bride had changed her mind, that's why he was selling. That's a lie, Jessica replied firmly. I received a telegram claiming James had changed his mind, but it was unsigned. Now I find you here with a suspicious bill of sale dated the day James disappeared. Sheriff Grant rode into the yard, followed by the search party members who had begun to gather. He took in the scene with a practiced eye. What's going on here, Langdon? He asked, dismounting. Langdon thrust the document at him. I've purchased Ellsworth's ranch fair and square. These people are preventing me from taking possession. The sheriff examined the paper carefully. This James Ellsworth's signature? Of course it is, Langdon blustered. Funny thing, the sheriff said slowly. I've got James's signature on several documents back at my office. This doesn't look right to me. Are you calling me a forger? Langdon's face reddened with anger. I'm saying this warrants investigation, especially with James missing. The sheriff folded the document and tucked it into his vest. No one's taking possession of anything until we find James Ellsworth, alive or dead. Langdon's hand dropped to his gun, but the arrival of more search party members made him reconsider. He was now significantly outnumbered. This isn't over, he growled, wheeling his horse around. His men followed, casting dark looks over their shoulders. After they had ridden away, the sheriff turned to Jessica. Miss Adams, I believe your fiancé may indeed be in serious danger. Langdon's not the type to take no for an answer. We need to find James, she insisted. That's what we're here for, Thomas Harper said, the other men nodding in agreement. Jacob organized the search party into groups, assigning each a section of the trail between the ranch and Fort Collins. He hesitated when it came to Jessica. "I know you want to help," he said, "but riding with the search party could be dangerous." "I'm coming," she stated firmly. "James is my fiancé. I have every right to look for him." Jacob studied her determined expression and finally nodded. "Stay with me then. We'll take the section nearest to Fort Collins." The search party set out as the sun cleared the eastern horizon. Jessica rode Penny again, having changed into her most practical traveling clothes. They moved quickly, eating up the miles as the morning progressed. The terrain grew rougher as they approached the foothills, the trail narrowing as it wound through stands of pine and rocky outcroppings. By midday, they had reached the area Jacob had chosen to search, a stretch of trail that passed through a narrow canyon. "Good place for an ambush," he commented grimly as they entered the canyon, its steep walls rising on either side. "Keep your eyes open." They proceeded cautiously, scanning the ground for any signs of disturbance. About halfway through the canyon, Jacob suddenly reined in. "There," he said, pointing to a scattering of dark stains on the rocky ground. "Blood." Jessica's heart lurched as Jacob dismounted to examine the stains more closely. "Not old," he confirmed. 2, maybe 3 days. He moved to the side of the trail, following a barely discernible track that led behind a large boulder. Someone dragged something or someone this way. Jessica slid from her saddle, following him despite her fear of what they might find. The track led to a narrow crevice in the canyon wall, partially obscured by brush that had been disturbed recently. "Stay back," Jacob warned as he drew his pistol and approached the opening. He peered cautiously into the darkness, then suddenly holstered his weapon and dropped to his knees. "James," he called, "can you hear me?" Jessica rushed forward, her heart in her throat. In the dim light filtering into the crevice, she could make out a man's form lying motionless on the ground. Jacob was already pulling him toward the entrance. As the light fell on his face, Jessica gasped. It was James, his face pale and drawn, a blood-soaked bandage wrapped around his thigh, but unmistakably the man whose daguerreotype she had treasured for months. "He's alive," Jacob announced, feeling for a pulse. "But barely. Looks like he was shot, managed to drag himself in here to hide." James's eyelids fluttered at the sound of voices, then opened slowly. His unfocused gaze moved from Jacob to Jessica, and recognition dawned. "Jessica?" he whispered, his voice raspy from thirst. "You came." "Of course I came," she replied, dropping to her knees beside him, tears flowing freely now. "I promised I would." Jacob was already examining the wound. "Bullet went through cleanly, but he's lost a lot of blood and the wound's infected." He looked up at Jessica. "We need to get him to a doctor, quickly." They worked together to fashion a travois from branches and Jacob's bedroll. Once James was secured, they started back toward Fort Laramie, moving as fast as they dared with their injured cargo. Jessica rode beside the travois, occasionally moistening James's parched lips with water from her canteen. During one of his lucid moments, James gripped her hand. "Langdon," he managed to say, "ambushed me, wouldn't sell, wanted you. Save your strength," she urged him. "We know about Langdon. The sheriff is involved now." By the time they reached Fort Laramie, James was burning with fever. The town doctor took one look at him and ushered them into his surgery, his expression grave. "It's bad," he told them after examining James. "The infection's set in deep." "I'll do what I can, but—" "He'll make it," Jacob stated with quiet conviction. "He's got too much to live for." Jessica spent the night in a chair beside James's bed in the doctor's back room, bathing his brow with cool water as he tossed in feverish delirium. Jacob remained too, standing guard at the door, his face set in grim lines. "You should rest," she told him as midnight approached. He shook his head. "Langdon's still out there. I'm not taking chances." In the small hours of the morning, as Jessica dozed fitfully, James's fever finally broke. She awoke to find him watching her, his eyes clear for the first time since they'd found him. "You really came," he whispered. She moved to sit on the edge of the bed, taking his hand in hers. Someone tried very hard to prevent it. I received a telegram saying you'd changed your mind." James shook his head weakly. "Never. I wrote to you every week. I know, I found the returned letters." She hesitated. "James, what happened with Langdon?" James's expression hardened. "He offered to buy my ranch again. When I refused, he said he'd heard my bride wasn't coming anyway. Showed me a telegram supposedly from you saying you'd changed your mind." His hand tightened around hers. "I knew it was false. Rode to Fort Collins as planned to get your curtain material. On the way back, Langdon and his men ambushed me, shot me, left me for dead. I managed to crawl into that crevice. He came to the ranch with forged sale papers," Jessica told him, "if Jacob hadn't been there." "Jacob's been watching over you?" James asked, glancing toward where Jacob stood vigilant at the door. "Yes, he's been." She searched for the right words. "A true friend to both of us." James nodded, his eyes already growing heavy again. "Tell him, thank you." He drifted back to sleep, his breathing steadier now. Jessica rose and approached Jacob. He woke up, the fevers broken. Relief washed over Jacob's face. "Good, that's good." "He thanked you," she said softly, "and so do I. Without you, I might have turned back after that telegram. James might have died in that canyon." Jacob shrugged, uncomfortable with her gratitude. "I did what anyone would do." "No," Jessica contradicted him gently. "You did what a rare and honorable man would do." Their eyes met, and something passed between them, an acknowledgement of the unusual circumstances that had brought them together, and the bond that had formed through their shared concern for James. The moment was broken by the arrival of Sheriff Grant. "I've arrested Langdon," he announced without preamble. One of his men confessed everything: the ambush, the forged papers, even bribing someone at the telegraph office to intercept your correspondence and send false messages. "Why?" Jessica asked. "Just for James's land," the sheriff shook his head. "Partly that, but mostly because Langdon had surveyed the property and found signs of a significant silver deposit on the North Ridge, worth a fortune if it's as extensive as he believes." "Silver?" Jacob looked stunned. "On James's land. And yours too, most likely, since you share that ridge," the sheriff confirmed. Langdon planned to acquire both properties by whatever means necessary. The news was still sinking in when James woke again, stronger this time. Over the next few days, his condition improved steadily. The doctor, initially doubtful, declared it a remarkable recovery. "Must have something worth living for," he commented with a knowing glance at Jessica. A week after they had found him, James was well enough to return to his ranch, though he still needed help walking. Jacob arranged for a wagon to transport him comfortably, with Jessica riding alongside. As they approached the ranch in the golden light of late afternoon, James gazed out at his land with new appreciation. "I thought I might never see this place again," he said quietly. "It's beautiful," Jessica told him, seeing the ranch through new eyes, not just as a home, but as the symbol of James's determination and vision for their future. Miguel and Alina greeted their return with tears of joy and a feast that belied the simplicity of the ranch kitchen. As they sat around the table that evening, James propped in a cushioned chair, his injured leg extended. Jessica felt a sense of rightness, of having found where she belonged. After dinner, Jacob rose to leave. "I should get back to my own place. Been neglecting it this past week." "Stay," James urged. "It's late and we have much to discuss. About the silver, about everything." Jacob hesitated, his eyes meeting Jessica's briefly before he nodded. "All right, but I'll sleep in the barn." "Nonsense," James objected. "The guest room is perfectly comfortable." Later, as Miguel and Alina departed for their cabin and James retired early, still weakened from his ordeal, Jessica found herself alone with Jacob on the front porch. The night was clear, stars scattered like diamond dust across the vast Wyoming sky. "What will you do now?" Jacob asked after a comfortable silence. "Marry James as planned," Jessica replied, "though perhaps after he's recovered fully." Jacob nodded, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "He's a fortunate man." "And I'm a fortunate woman," she added. To have found not just a good man to marry, but to have made a true friend as well. Their eyes met, and Jessica felt a curious tightness in her chest. Jacob's steadfast presence through the crisis had revealed a depth of character that impressed her deeply. In another time, in another place. But no, her path was set, her heart was committed. "I should turn in," she said, rising from her chair. "Good night, Jacob." "Good night, Jessica," he replied softly. The next morning brought news that upended everything. Jessica was helping Alina prepare breakfast when the doctor arrived unexpectedly. "Thought I'd check on my patient," he explained, heading for James's bedroom. When he emerged some time later, his expression was troubled. "Miss Adams, Mr. Eastwood, could I speak with you privately?" They followed him to the front porch, apprehension building. "The wound is healing well enough," the doctor began, "but I'm concerned about something else. Mr. Ellsworth's heart. I detected a murmur that worries me." "What does that mean?" Jessica asked, fear clutching at her. "It means his heart was likely weakened by the trauma and blood loss. With proper care and a quiet life, he might live many years yet. But what?" Jacob pressed. The doctor sighed. "But the stress and physical demands of running a ranch could kill him. I've told him he needs to consider selling and moving to town, or at least hiring more help to do the physical labor." Jessica's mind whirled. James loved this land, had built everything here with his own hands. How could he give it up? "What did James say?" she asked. "He laughed," the doctor replied grimly. "Said he'd rather die doing what he loves than live half a life in town. Stubborn man." After the doctor left, Jessica found James sitting on the edge of his bed, staring out the window at his land. "The doctor told you?" he asked without turning. "Yes." She sat beside him, taking his hand. "James, you need to consider what he said." James shook his head. "This land is everything to me, Jessica. It's what I built for us, for our future." "But what kind of future will we have if you work yourself into an early grave?" she countered gently. "I'd rather have years with you in town than months with you here." He turned to her then, his expression pained. "Would you? Could you be happy living in town, giving up all this?" Jessica hesitated. The truth was, she had only just begun to appreciate the beauty and possibilities of ranch life. The thought of living in Fort Laramie in some small house in town held little appeal, but if it meant James would live. "I want you to live, James," she said finally. "Whatever that takes." He studied her face for a long moment. "You know, when I was lying in that canyon thinking I was going to die, I had a lot of time to think about what matters most." He squeezed her hand. "I realized something. I want you to be happy, Jessica, more than anything." "I want the same for you," she replied. "I know." His smile was sad but determined. "Which is why I've made a decision." James insisted on moving to the main room to continue their conversation with Jacob present. Once settled in his chair by the fireplace, he looked at them both with resolve. "The doctor says I can't run this ranch anymore, not if I want to live," he stated without preamble. "And the truth is, even before this happened, I was finding it harder than I let on. The winters are harsh, the work never ending." He took a deep breath. "I think it's time I admitted that this life isn't what I thought it would be." "What are you saying?" Jessica asked, confused. "I'm saying that perhaps this is a sign. The silver, the ambush, my heart, maybe it's all pointing to a change." He looked at Jacob. "You love this land as much as I do, maybe more. You know every acre of your ranch and could manage mine just as well." Jacob frowned. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting a partnership. You manage both ranches, hire the necessary hands with the money from the silver claim. I'll help where I can, but from a position that won't kill me." He turned to Jessica. "And you and I can decide where we want to live here, in town, even back east if you prefer." "James, Jessica began, but he held up a hand. "Let me finish. I've had a lot of time to think this past week. About what I want, what you might want." He took a deep breath. "And about what I've seen between you and Jacob." Jessica felt her cheeks flush. "There's nothing, there's respect," James interrupted gently. "There's admiration. Maybe something more that neither of you has acknowledged, even to yourselves." Jacob stood abruptly. James, you're talking nonsense. Jessica came out here to marry you. I've only been helping as any friend would. Have you? James asked quietly. Or have you been doing what a man does when he cares deeply for a woman? An uncomfortable silence fell. Jessica couldn't bring herself to look at Jacob, her emotions too confused to examine closely. I'm not angry, James continued. How could I be? Jacob, you saved my life. You protected Jessica when I couldn't. And Jessica, you traveled thousands of miles to be my wife, even after receiving that telegram. He sighed. But I have to ask myself and you if we're proceeding with this marriage because it's what we truly want, or because it's what we committed to months ago when we were different people. Jessica stared at him, stunned by the direction of his thoughts. Are you saying you don't want to marry me? I'm saying I want you to be sure, James replied earnestly. And I need to be sure too. My brush with death has changed me, Jessica. Made me realize I'm not the same man who courted you in Boston, the man who promised you a grand adventure in the West, building something from nothing. He gestured to his injured leg. This may heal, but my heart won't. I'll never be the strong, robust husband I promised to be. That doesn't matter to me, Jessica insisted, moving to kneel beside his chair. I came here to marry you, not your physical strength. James covered her hand with his. I know, and that's why I need to be honest with you now before we make vows we might regret. He glanced at Jacob, who stood rigid by the fireplace. I saw how you two worked together to find me, how you've come to rely on each other. There's a natural understanding between you that you and I never quite had, Jessica. This is absurd, Jacob broke in. You're still weak from your ordeal, James. You're not thinking clearly. I'm thinking more clearly than I have in years, James countered. And I'm giving you both the chance to be honest about your feelings before it's too late. Jessica rose, confusion and a strange sense of guilt warring within her. I need some air, she said, hurrying from the room and out onto the porch. The afternoon sun was warm on her face as she gripped the porch railing, trying to make sense of her emotions. Was James right? Had something developed between her and Jacob during their shared crisis? She couldn't deny the respect and admiration she felt for him, the comfort she found in his steady presence. But love, she heard the door open behind her but didn't turn. He's wrong, Jacob said quietly, about us. Now she did turn, searching his face. Is he? Jacob's expression was troubled. It doesn't matter, you came here to marry James, he needs you now more than ever. That's not an answer, Jessica pressed. James thinks there's something between us, is he right? Jacob looked away, his jaw tight. What I might feel doesn't matter, it matters to me, she said softly. He met her gaze then, his blue eyes intense. Fine. Yes, I've come to care for you more than I should, more than is proper given the circumstances. But that doesn't change the fact that you're promised to my friend, a good man who loves you and needs you. Jessica's heart raced at his admission, confirming what she had perhaps known but refused to acknowledge that her own feelings for Jacob had grown beyond mere friendship. What do we do? She whispered. We do the right thing, Jacob replied firmly. You marry James as planned. I keep my distance. In time these feelings will fade. Before Jessica could respond, the door opened again and James appeared, leaning heavily on a cane. No, he said, having clearly overheard their conversation. That's not the right thing at all. James, you should be resting, Jessica said, moving to help him. He waved her off. I've done enough resting. Now I need to fix what's broken before it's too late. He looked from Jessica to Jacob. I've made my decision. I'm releasing Jessica from our engagement. What? Jessica gasped. James, no. Yes, he said firmly, for both our sakes. Jessica, I care for you deeply, but what I feel isn't the kind of love that sustains a marriage. It's admiration, respect, affection, but not the love that makes your heart race when you see someone, that makes you willing to risk everything just to be with them. He smiled sadly. I think I've known that for a while, but I didn't want to admit it. It was easier to follow through with our plans. But our letters, Jessica protested. All your preparations were genuine, James assured her. I wanted to make you happy, I still do, but now I see that might not be with me. He turned to Jacob. And you, old friend, I've never seen you look at a woman the way you look at Jessica. Not in all the years I've known you. Jacob shook his head. This isn't right, James. You and Jessica have plans, a future together. Plans change, James said simply. Futures reshape themselves. Mine certainly has. He took Jessica's hand. I'm not doing this out of some misguided nobility. I'm doing it because it's right for all of us. Jessica felt tears streaming down her face, confused by the tangle of emotions, grief for the future she had imagined with James, guilt at the relief she felt, and a tremulous hope when she looked at Jacob. What will you do? She asked James. Take the doctor's advice for starters, he replied with a small smile. Move into town, at least for now. Use my share of the silver money to open that hardware store I've always talked about. Live a quieter life. He glanced at Jacob. And yes, I'd still like to discuss that partnership for the ranch. But not today. Today, I think you two have some talking to do. With that, he turned and went back inside, leaving Jessica and Jacob alone on the porch once more. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken thoughts and feelings. He's doing this for us, Jacob finally said, his voice rough with emotion. Yes, Jessica agreed, but also for himself. I think he's telling the truth that he realized our marriage wouldn't be what either of us truly wanted. Jacob moved closer, still maintaining a respectful distance. And what do you truly want, Jessica? She looked up at him, seeing the question in his eyes, the hesitation, the hope. I want to be sure, she answered honestly. I want time to know my own heart clearly without confusion or guilt, he nodded, understanding in his expression. Then that's what we'll do, take time, there's no rush now. Jessica felt a weight lift from her shoulders. Thank you. In the weeks that followed, James moved into a comfortable house in Fort Laramie, using part of the first proceeds from the silver claim. The mine proved to be even richer than Langdon had suspected, providing all three of them with substantial means. James and Jacob formed their partnership, with Jacob managing the day-to-day operations of both ranches, and James contributing his knowledge and experience in an advisory role. Jessica decided to stay at James's ranch temporarily, helping Alina with the household while she considered her future. She and Jacob saw each other frequently as he came to oversee the work, their conversations growing easier, their understanding of each other deepening. James, true to his word, showed no resentment or bitterness. His health improved with the reduced physical demands, and he threw himself into establishing his hardware store, which quickly became a gathering place for the men of Fort Laramie. 2 months after James had released her from their engagement, Jessica rode out to the North Ridge with Jacob to see the silver mine. The fall day was crisp and clear, the aspen trees a blaze of gold against the evergreens. It's beautiful up here, Jessica commented as they dismounted at the overlook, the valley spread out below them in a patchwork of greens and golds. It is, Jacob agreed, standing close beside her. I've always loved this ridge. They stood in companionable silence, watching an eagle soar on the thermals rising from the valley. James seems happy, Jessica said eventually. I had dinner with him last week. The store is doing well, and he mentioned a widow who's been visiting regularly to purchase supplies for her boarding house. Jacob smiled. Mrs. Henley, yes, I've noticed that too. She brings him pies. He deserves happiness, Jessica said softly. So do you, Jacob replied, turning to face her. Jessica, these past months have been, I've never known a woman like you, strong, determined, compassionate. He took her hand gently. I think James was right about us. There is something between us, something real and true. Jessica's heart quickened. I think so too. I haven't changed my mind in years about what I want in life, Jacob said, his blue eyes intense. A good ranch, honest work, someday a family, but meeting you, it's like everything became clearer, more focused. He squeezed her hand. I love you, Jessica. I think I have since that first day when you stood on Widow Henley's steps with your chin up despite that telegram, determined to find answers. Jessica felt tears of joy well in her eyes. I love you too, Jacob. It grew so gradually I hardly noticed until it was already there, as natural as breathing. He drew her closer, one hand rising to cup her cheek. I know it's only been 2 months since James ended your engagement. If you need more time, no, she interrupted gently. I don't need more time to know what's in my heart. He smiled then, a full, radiant smile that transformed his usually serious face. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he lowered his lips to hers. The kiss was tender at first, then deepened as she responded, her arms sliding around his neck. When they finally parted, both breathless, Jacob rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me, Jessica, be my wife, my partner in everything." "Yes," she whispered, joy bubbling through her like a spring. "Yes, I will." They were married 2 weeks later in Fort Laramie's small church. James stood as Jacob's best man, his genuine happiness for them evident in his broad smile and the enthusiastic way he led the guests in a toast at the reception held at his store. "To Jacob and Jessica," he proclaimed, raising his glass. "Two of the finest people I've ever known. May your lives together be as beautiful as the land we all love." After the celebration, Jacob took Jessica home to his ranch, their ranch now. He had spent the past 2 weeks preparing it for her, adding touches he thought would make her comfortable, including a sitting room modeled after the one James had built. As they stood on the porch that evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold, Jacob's arm around her waist, Jessica felt a profound sense of rightness. "Happy?" Jacob asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Completely," she assured him, turning in his arms to face him. "I traveled thousands of miles to find my future, and here it is, though not at all as I imagined it would be." "Life rarely follows the paths we expect," Jacob said, smiling down at her. "But sometimes it leads us exactly where we need to be." As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, he swept her into his arms and carried her across the threshold of their home, into the future they would build together on the land they both had come to love. In the years that followed, the Eastwood Ranch prospered under Jacob and Jessica's joint stewardship. The silver mine continued to produce, providing wealth that allowed them to expand their operations and introduce modern improvements. Jessica established a small school for the children of their ranch hands and neighboring homesteads, finding joy in teaching once more. James's hardware store became the heart of Fort Laramie's business district. To no one's surprise, he and widow Henley married 18 months after Jacob and Jessica's wedding. His heart condition remained stable with proper care and a less physically demanding lifestyle. On a bright spring morning 5 years after Jessica had first arrived in Wyoming, she stood on the porch of the ranch house, watching Jacob return from the far pasture with their 3-year-old son, James Thomas Eastwood, perched in front of him on the saddle. The little boy's delighted laughter carried across the yard as Jacob urged the horse into a gentle trot for the final approach. Her hand rested on her swollen belly, feeling their second child shift within her. This pregnancy had been easier than the first, and Dr. Wilson predicted a boy again, though Jacob insisted it would be a girl with her mother's spirit and determination. As they dismounted, Jacob lifting little James down with exaggerated care, Jessica thought back to that fateful telegram that had nearly prevented her from coming west. How different her life would have been if she had turned back, if Jacob hadn't been there to question its authenticity, if James hadn't had the courage and wisdom to recognize the truth of their hearts. "What are you thinking about, looking so serious?" Jacob asked as he approached, their son running ahead to show her a feather he had found. "Just how fortunate I am," she replied, accepting his kiss. "How one telegram nearly changed everything." Jacob smiled, placing his hand over hers on her belly. "I haven't changed my mind in years about what matters most," he said, echoing words he had spoken on that ridge years before. "You, our family, this land. Everything else is just details." As little James tugged at her skirt, eager to share his adventure, Jessica looked out at the ranch, their home, their future, their legacy. The journey that had brought her here had been unexpected, filled with dangers and surprises, but it had led her exactly where she belonged. With Jacob's arm around her shoulders and their son's small hand in hers, Jessica Adams Eastwood stepped back into their home, her heart full with the certainty that this land, this man, this life was what she had been seeking all along.